My guest is Mariano Nunez, CEO and co-founder of Onapsis. Welcome, Mariano.
Thank you, Richard. It's a pleasure.
Tell us again what Onapsis does.
So Synapsis is a pure-play cybersecurity company focused on securing business-critical applications, mainly from major vendors like SAP and Oracle. So you have the SAP Oracle E-Business Suite, Oracle JD Edwards applications that are really the backbone and the lifeblood of the global 2,000 organizations.
And of course, where most critical data resides in these organizations.
Exactly. You're talking about intellectual property, financial reporting, customer data, vendor data, business process as well, right? So companies that cannot run if those systems go down.
Now, when we hear of major breaches, we usually don't get all the details, but how often do those actually involve attacks against these major applications?
Yeah, I can share with you that we've been called to do SAP incident response projects, actually in a couple of the high-profile breaches that we've seen in the headlines, right? Usually, as you said, you don't see in the headlines what was the system that was affected. But in actually a couple of cases, we were called to complement the other forensics investigations that were being done in other parts of the network. And we were looking at the SAP systems to understand how the attackers actually exploited vulnerabilities and retrieved the data from those systems.
Yeah, I can imagine, though you don't have to tell me this, that the Office of Personnel Management breach was on a big IBM mainframe. So imagine there was some database and some big application layer there.
Well, what's out there that I can mention because it's in the public domain is that there was a vendor or a supplier of OPMs called USIS, and it's been reported that USIS, basically they provided background investigation services for
Right.
OPM and DHS. They were the major customers. And it was reported that they had a breach on their SAP system. So how much is that connected with the biggest OPM case, we don't know. But based on the forensics assessment an independent company done, they proved that SAP was actually breached in USIS.
So SAP and Oracle have a lot of moving parts. How do you actually go about securing that?
Yeah, that's what we can only do this, and we cannot be like a multi-dimension security company. We are really specialized and focused on these business applications because, as you say, they're very complex. You're talking about proprietary protocols, very complex architectures that are maybe dated or started in the 80s, as well as newer platforms like SAP HANA, which was released only a few years ago. So you really need to do a lot of effort in understanding how not only the systems are architecture and what's basically a threat model, right? How the bad guys might be able to break into the systems, but also like how really these systems are implemented and customized and deployed at real customer implementations. Because anyone can look at a system in lab, in a vacuum, and try to understand kind of threats to that system, but really what's challenging and where we really have a lot of expertise is understanding how these systems are running in real life environments and what are the security concerns and threats in those environments.
So there's the attacker that can just, come from the other side of the world, get through the network, get to the database, steal everything. And then there's the more common route where it's just a privileged user who already has access to the data.
Exactly.
How do you control the difference between that privileged user doing their job and the attackers actually stole their credentials?
You have exactly the same two, let's say, vectors in the business application world. So you have someone that can exploit an SAP vulnerability or an Oracle business application vulnerability to get access with full compromise, like basically fully compromising the system without even having a valid user or password. Mm-hmm. And that could be someone from the internet, or it could be someone like already in the internal network, right? And then you have the privileged user monitoring. So what we do there, in both cases, we analyze system activity and other data that would lead us to understand indicators of compromise. So we can look at SAP exploits. So we have the biggest or the largest knowledge base of SAP known exploits, as well as heuristics and patterns to monitor user behavior. So why is this SAP administrator suddenly accessing HR data or financial data? Maybe that's someone who has privileges and is doing something wrong, or maybe it's an attacker who took over those credentials, right, and is actually impersonating that user. So we need to provide the ability, and we do that through the platform of alerting companies on both situations.
I know Oracle gets criticized for its very long patch cycles. Is SAP in the same boat? Are both of them starting to speed things up a little?
Yeah, I think SAP is actually speeding things more than Oracle. I think they're doing a better job compared to when we started working with them 9 years ago. SAP is really improving in the way they are developing the security patches, developing more secure software out of the gate, let's say, and also releasing patches. But the main problem relies in people being able to digest those patches, right? So the patch comes out, there is a known vulnerability that can be exploited, and we have customers that, or we know organizations that never applied a security patch, and they only apply patches when they do a functional upgrade, right? Not really because of a security perspective. So there is really a big window of exposure to both known and unknown vulnerabilities because of that. Because the systems are so mission critical that it's sometimes people have fear of disruption and don't want to apply the patch.
So what's the process when somebody's engaged with Onapsis and deploying your product? Do they have to take down the whole system? And
No, so that's a great question. And so that's where we come in, right? And really, I think the expertise helps a lot. We are able to analyze the security risk or vulnerabilities that are affecting the system and give customers really an unbiased perspective on what that risk means for them. So let's say that you use the vulnerability and compliance module of our solution, and comes back saying that you have 100 security risks. Maybe we know that because of your specific configuration or your specific business risk and context, only 10 of them are actually very critical and are the low-hanging fruits that you need to apply now to get the most protection that you can. We know that 100% security is impossible, right? So from that perspective, we help people prioritize and really only apply the patches that they need to apply. But we also came out with something that I think is very interesting, is that the concept of compensating controls for SAP patches, right? So maybe there is a patch that you can't simply not apply because it will disrupt the process. And even though you know it's a security risk, there's like 90% of your revenue going through that business process. So in that case, what we do is we're able to monitor that, let's say, interface or that user configuration or that setting in order to understand if it's being exploited. So if we see that things are working regularly, that's all right, and we are basically accepting the risk. But if we see that someone is exploiting that risk, then we can connect to your SIEM, to your firewall, to your next generation or IPS solution in order to respond to that as soon as possible and mitigate the impact, right?
are there any metrics we could watch to understand if the threat is rising? More scans of the network, I guess, against SAP protocols?
Yeah, and I think that in that direction it was very interesting. Actually, about a week ago, Ponemon Institute came out with a study. They surveyed, I think, over 600 IT professionals and IT security professionals. And in most cases, actually, 65% of them believe that the recipe system has been compromised in the last 24 months. So that there was at least one breach in their systems. Some actually, a percentage of them say that they're actually more than once or twice that happened. And we still see that same, one of the biggest problems that we saw reflected in the study is that senior leadership understands the criticality of SAP to profitability and to the bottom line, basically, because they run everything through that. But they really underestimate the SAP cybersecurity risks. So there is this really unsustainable status quo that's creating a big gap. That's what the attackers end up exploiting, right?
So one of the problems with breach disclosure is we learn of the breach, and the people whose records were stolen eventually get a notice. But the security community and the other organizations in the world don't get the full forensics. We don't understand what systems were attacked. And therefore, if there were a successful SAP application breach, we may never learn of it. So all the other people who've vulnerable to the exact same thing will also eventually suffer.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what we see, right? We were part of these SAP incident response projects that really enable us to get some insights on what really happens when an SAP system is breached. And there is public evidence and public cases of SAP being target of cyber attacks. And I think the Ponemon study is interesting in the fact that you have these 600 people, 65% of those saying that their system were actually, they detected a breach over the last 24 months, right? So most likely what they detect is the end consequence, right? The fraud or the system taken offline or the information theft maybe eventually, but they are not able to detect and respond in real time to those attacks because they don't have the right people, processes, and technology to do that.
So what's next for you? Where do you go from here?
So we're going to keep growing. We had a great year last year. We've been growing over 100% year over year. In revenue, we crossed the 100 employee mark. So that's really good. We got investment. We raised 18 million last year. Actually, one of the interesting facts about that is that Schlumberger is one of our investors. So they are a customer and also an investor of the company, and deploying one of the largest SAP implementations. So I think that's pretty good endorsement and validation that what we're doing is providing a lot of value for large SAP customers. We also we keep bringing great talent on board. We have new additions to the management team. We had additions to the board of directors with Brad Maiorino, the CISO of Target, J.R. Smith, the former CEO of ABG Technologies. So really, we have a very good momentum. We were awarded a patent finally after 5 years of waiting for a lot of the underlying ideas and algorithms that we have. So for us, it's really, after a lot of hard work, we're seeing the momentum in the marketplace where we're getting inbound requests to actually secure and provide our security platform to customers of Fortune 10, Fortune 100 organizations, as well as now we're kicking off a federal practice. So that's something that we're going to be expanding as well this year.
You're right. That was a very good year. Thank you very much, Mariano.
Thank you very much, Richard.